Okay guys, so in this video we are going to look at how we implemented register support, or being able to register a user account basically. So let's have a look at that. So if I go to Fmail here, we see that we have this new fancy shiny form. It's fairly standard. Like, the reason why I haven't put all that much energy into this is because it's some people like to do that, and of course application development would want you, like, if you want to do this properly, you should probably put a little bit more effort into it than I have. But a registration part, like that part of this application, I don't think we need to go all that heavy on this, and I think it looks okay as it is. I haven't really modeled like the registration flow for like Google Mail or like Gmail, because it's a lot more advanced than what we need for this application. But we are still going to, of course, treat it as a real production application. So what's going to happen now is that if I try to go to my inbox like this, I'm actually going to get redirected to register. And if I try to do inbox like that, I'm going to get back to the registration. And the reason why is because I don't have a session. So let's take a moment here and just do something like something like this, and a super insecure password, and then we'll just hit enter and register. And now we're actually in the application, and now everything works as before, where you can click around and, like, we've already seen this application for quite a few times now, right? So why is this happening? If I refresh it, I'm still here, right? But if I go to my tools here and I go to application, we can see that I have this cookie here for this domain, which is called session. And if I remove that and I refresh, I'm going to get redirected back to the registration page. And in the next story, we're probably going to implement login flows and stuff of that nature instead. But this is in essence what we want, right? We want to be able to register an account, and if we haven't registered an account, we shouldn't be able to access the application. Right, let's have a look at how we did that. So in order to store our sessions, because a session, and for those of you who may not know that, sessions is a way for you to store information about basically the client that is connecting to you. So you saw that in my browser I had a session cookie, and that session cookie includes an identifier that maps to my server. In other words, when I make a request, I simply include, or the browser is going to include that cookie in my headers, send a request to the server, and then the server is going to know that I am the person that the server dispatched that session or started the session for. And I can put a lot of information on a session, but we will touch on that in just a moment. So in order to do sessions management, I decided to go with Redis. So I added Redis to our dependencies here, as you can see here, to our little Docker Compose file. Now, I don't have to have Redis. I could just as well store my sessions in, like, Mongo. I could probably put it in Elasticsearch as well, but that wouldn't make much sense. But I could store it in my regular database. But I wanted to use Redis and kind of illustrate it for you guys, because Redis is a very, very popular database for this sort of work, because it is an in-memory database, which allows it to very quickly extract information when the request comes in, and that's what you want. You want to have a really, really rapid and high performance extracting of session information, because it's something that's going to happen every single time a user comes to our application, right? So we want that to be in memory, so it's really, really fast. Anywho, let's look at the package, and we see here that I've added a few dependencies, so bcrypt being the big one, and then Express Session, which is just a plugin that allows us to do session management. We'll touch on bcrypt in just a moment. It's for encryption purposes, or hashing, if you will, hashing purposes. So let's actually shut this down here. And let's walk through this little application thing here. So what I've done here is quite a bit of a drastic change. Let's actually look at this here. So you may see that there's quite a lot of less stuff going on in our application file. And the reason why I did this is because now we have two different concepts in the same file. And the file was going to get pretty big at this point, because now we have endpoints that relates to a user, like the user model, and we have routes that are going to be the ones that we've had before, like that relates to an email. So I wanted to split that out. So what I did here is that I actually created this routes directory. We will look at that in just a moment, and it will hopefully make sense to you. But let's start with the basics. So first and foremost, I just thought, all right, let's disable the X powered by header, which is just a default thing that I think is super annoying. I don't know why we have this by default, but basically this is a header that is included when we use Express, which tells the consumer of our little application here, or the client, which technology we are using. And since I don't want to give that information away just as readily, I just disabled it because, hey, it's good practice and it makes things a little bit more secure. Right, then I create a middleware here, which is this session thing, like the Express session. And then I have this thing here where if I have declared environmental variables for my secrets or my Redis host or my Redis port, I use that. Otherwise, I simply grab this information like with the default value. And then I set my name of my session cookie to just session. And then basically I've just configured this so that I'm not going to resave, basically means that, or I'm not going to like resave the cookie whenever, like, unless it changes. I don't want to just every time something happens sync that up to the database. I just want it to be just live in memory until something changes on the session, and when that happens, then I can save it. And the same thing goes here for saving uninitialized, where I don't want to do that either. I don't want, I mean, if there's nothing on the session, I haven't stored anything, I don't see a reason to put a cookie. Like, I don't want to put an empty session cookie without reason, right? And then I have this cookie section here where I have enabled same site, which enforces that the cookie actually, like my session needs to come from the same site. In other words, the same domain, so it's tied to that domain. And then I set the max age of the cookie to about an hour, where it means that the session will, like the session, unless it's refreshed, we will talk about refreshing and stuff of that nature later, but it will expire in 1 hour, and then the user has to like revalidate him or herself again. And then we set HTTP only, so that the browser will store it in a secure manner, or rather if it has support for that, most browsers do, so that, you know, we can't extract the session cookie by just using plain old JavaScript. And this final thing here is secure. We're going to look at that later, where we start serving this application over HTTPS, which basically saying that if I set it to secure, then this cookie will only work over HTTPS. So it will be a so-called secure cookie, if you will. Cool. And apart from that, we've added, let's see here if I missed something in the diff here. I think I added something more, right? Yeah, I did that as well. Let's look at that as well. So you can see here that I'm extracted out my routes into these two imports, and then I just put that in at the root. I mounted to the root directory, or the root of the URL path, and we will look at that in just a moment. And then I did this thing here because now I actually have something that I want to be able to express. So I've created a new error, which allows me to actually set a status that I want to send back, because we now have the concept of like we want now to be able to start thinking about, okay, which HTTP method response, or like in the response, what do we want to express to the consumer of this. So if we have, let's say, a user who tries to access a route that they have and they are not logged in, they don't have a session, then we want to return a 401 or something of that nature, which states according to the HTTP protocol that, all right, this person is unauthorized, or the request is unauthorized. So I don't just want to return a 500 anymore. Now I want to go one further and be able to actually express the reason why a request fails. And that's what's happening here. Right, let's have a look at this stuff here, which is, well, it's sort of interesting. So we have a user model, a user service is declared. So we just added these things here, and we instantiate the user service, and then we export the user service. Easy peasy, right? Let's look at our user model. It's fairly simple right now. All it has is an email, a password, and a created at date, so we know when the user was created. Nothing super amazing there. We can actually just look at the model here, like the testing as well. Basics, standard stuff. This is virtually just boilerplate stuff right here, where we just make sure that the serialization works correctly, right? And then we can look at the service, which is fairly small right now. So basically what we do here is that we declare the service, include the user model, so we have our database connection, and then we have a get user by email, a create user, and a register user. So get user by email allows us to just find a user by their email, and then we have a create user, which is going to just take the email and the password and create that user, right? And then we have register user, which is a little bit of a special case because this is how we actually do the registration. So we take in an email and a password, and then we get user by email, and we might have a user here because we don't know. There might not be a user who has this email. The reason why we want to do that is to do this. We want to check if there is a user, because if there already is a user with that email, we don't want to create it twice, because that would be a collision. And then we do this, where we use bcrypt, which is a hashing function, and all it does is that it converts this plain text password into a hash that we then store in our database instead of the actual password, so that our system and the thing that is in our database is just the hash, and there's no way for us to know what the original password was. And why we want to do that is because this is just this is basic standard practice to basically manage passwords, guys. Like this is the absolute bare minimum you should do in order to ensure that your users' passwords are secure. You should hash them. And that's about it, really. So, oh, and one more thing. The reason why this works is because later when the user tries to log in, we're going to run the password that they provide in the login step through this hashing algorithm again with the same amount of salt rounds, which is just the way, like how many iterations of hashing you're actually going to apply to the string. So logically, that means that if you give me the same password as you registered with, the hash is going to be the same. And that's why we can use that to compare if the user has the correct password, right? I hope that made sense. Anywho, then I have this little thing here. I added a status error, which is just this way of, like, we'll look at, I only use it in one single scenario right now, but the idea here is basically that we extend the error, the original, like the JavaScript error class, and we pass the message, and then we grab a status as well, and we simply set that status to this instance, and then we call super with message, which is going to actually pass that up to the error class. And yeah, that's how we now can express what status we want to send back to the client, as you saw earlier. Cool. So user is logged in. Now this is my own one and only middleware, or helper function, if you will, to do validation. And basically what it does is that it grabs the status error and it takes in the request, and it just checks if there is a session and if the user ID is set on that session. If the user ID is set, then we simply allow the user to pass through because the user has logged in. We haven't verified if the user is the user. Like we're gonna have to do some more validation, but that's gonna be later, like in the next story. But at least now we can restrict a user from accessing certain routes if they haven't logged in. And that's what we want. And so as you can see here, we call status error with unauthorized and 401, and that's going to be the response, right? And then I added another component, which is like this register component to my little CSS file here. And let's have a look at app.jsx, because there's quite a few things that's happened here. As you can see, the difference is fairly big, and we will have a look at that. So the reason why I did this is because now I want to be able to route to either two different components in completely different components. I don't, if we have a look at, well, it's going to be clear in just a moment. You see that I have this app component now that contains, if we look at the diff here again, that basically all of this stuff here, which is the actual layout of our login, like our inbox and all of that stuff, like the panel, the actual application, all that stuff was put into this component now, because I need to be able to switch between that component and my login page or my register page. And I thought that this was a nicer way to do that, so I simply put it one layer down. So there's this route now that actually contains all of this. And if we go and look at that, this is how it looks basically. So the reason why we want to do it this way is because when we now go to the page, like when we try to go to our Fmail application, the first thing we need to know is if the user is logged in. But remember, we can't check if there's a session in the browser or anything like that, so we need to make a network call. And the network call we want to make is this thing here. We want to go and check if the user is logged in, and I mean that's fairly straightforward. And if we are logged in, we just want to continue, like just show the application. But if we're not logged in, then we should redirect to the correct path right. And doing this in this manner is necessary because we can't do a redirect on the server when we're using Ajax like this. So, and the reason for that is because what's simply going to happen is that like the XHR protocol, which is the thing we are actually using when we call the server for Ajax, is just going to follow the redirect internally, and it's just going to hit another endpoint and nothing's going to work. So we want to do the redirect from here and just basically express that, hey, you're not logged in. So as you can see here, all I'm going to do is that if the response isn't okay and the status is equal to 401, I'm simply going to push the register route to my history, and now the user is there. And basically that's it, and otherwise I'm going to set the state to show, and this is the thing that's going to happen. So basically I show this component that actually represents the whole page, or I just return null and there's nothing there. And in the future I might, as you see here, there's a to-do here, we might want to add a loading screen or something like that. That could be useful. Cool. Let's look at this thing here where this, oh yes, I did this, I noticed this little thing here where I had done a destructure import on my with the router here, but they actually provide a with the router component, so I just wanted to optimize that a little bit so I could just specifically ask for that function instead of destructuring it like that. Cool, so the register page is a fairly small component, and all it does is that, yeah, it has this form here, and hopefully this makes sense. There's an onSubmit and the history, like that represent the history API, and there's a password, and yeah, this is just a markup basically. And then I of course wrap it in with router because I'm going to have to be able to do a little bit of a, like I need the history here. And if we look at the register container, which is the thing that is wrapping, we see here that there's an onSubmit, and it gets in the event and the history. We just as we have seen before, since the event that's being fired is referencing the actual form, we just extract these values, the email, password, and confirmation. And we can actually look at that in action just for the sake of it. If I have a, let's say I do something like that, and I do this thing there, and then I try to click register. Passwords does not match confirmation, like something like that. So you just give the user a little bit of help to make sure that they inputted the same password. This is a fairly nice thing. I think you should be doing this. Anywho, so we basically just do that, and then we have a register request, which is this little thing here, which is just this, yeah, simple little request. And then we just attempt to make the network call. So we're going to go to the register API, like that endpoint, and we are going to send the register request. And hey, if something went wrong, we are simply going to throw an error, and then we're going to show the alert, which is, let's say that I actually try to do this. Let's see, I do this and do that. You already have a user with, there is already a user with that email. So that's what's going to be shown, right? And that's what's happening over here. And if the response is okay, we are going to push the inbox. In other words, basically go to the inbox. And this time when we go there, the component is going to remount, make the network call to isLoggedIn, and isLoggedIn, that endpoint in the server, is going to return a response and say, hey, you are logged in, don't worry about it, and we're going to show the component. That's the flow. Anywho, register CSS is here, very minor, nothing much happening there. And as we can see here, we've had a few paths added. I've added like register is logged in, this anything. I don't remember if I actually use that anymore. I might just remove that, but hey, these are the routes, nothing fancy. And now let's look at the email routes. Now, as you can see here, these are virtually let's just scroll very slowly through here. You can see these are exactly the same routes as before. Like nothing has changed apart from one thing, which is, as you see here now, we have this middleware between all of them, which is called user is logged in, because we want to restrict access to this to this route. As you saw earlier, isLoggedIn is going to check if there is a session. If there is no session, you shouldn't have access to this at all, because these are all things that we want to be private for anybody who is not a registered user. And yeah, that is about it, really. Let's have a look at this. Yeah, we have the user routes, of course, as well. We'll look at that. This is just the export, convenience export of all of that good stuff. Cool, and then we finally have these things here where we can post to /users, and we're simply going to extract the email and the password that is in the body and try to register our user. And if that registration works, we are going to set our user's ID on the session, and that's all there is to it. And now this is going to be stored in our database, and if the server restarts or something like that, we're going to have that information, and hey, the user still maintains the session, which is great. And then we have this endpoint here, which does absolutely nothing. All it does is that it has this user is logged in middleware, and as we know, it's going to just fail. It's going to return 401 if the user isn't logged in, and if it does work, it's simply going to hit this thing, and it's just going to return an empty 200 response. And that's about it, really. So this is our first draft of making a registration, and in the next story, we can actually start by moving this thing over here to testing, which is great. And now we can start thinking about adding login support. So that's going to come up next.